Emily Wilkins had moved to Maplewood Heights with the hope of a quieter life. A freelance programmer by trade, she relished the idea of working remotely in a peaceful suburban environment. The day she purchased her cozy, single-story home on Chestnut Court, she felt certain this would be a fresh start. A garden out back, a picket fence, and neighbors who nodded politely as they walked by. Maplewood Heights seemed friendly enough. During her first few months in the neighborhood, Emily primarily kept to herself. She was no recluse, but with a busy schedule, debugging code and meeting deadlines, it was easiest to stay indoors. She had little interest in the local gossip, although rumors of a very strict homeowners association did reach her ears. Residents whispered about the HOA's heavy-handed rules, policies regulating mailbox color, trash can placement, even the diameter of lawn ornaments. The stories sounded overblown, so she paid them little mind. One crisp morning in early spring, Emily opened her curtains and noticed fluorescent orange flags dotting the edge of her lawn. Confused, she slipped on a hoodie and stepped outside. Small stakes with flags were arranged in a neat line stretching from the sidewalk across her front yard all the way to a junction box near the back fence. A sign on one stake read, "Utility Construction Zone, Fiber Optic Installation." Her curiosity flared. Emily knew about the neighborhood's plans for improved internet access. Someone had mentioned a potential upgrade at an HOA meeting she half listened to, but she certainly hadn't given permission for work crews to trench through her property. Concerned, she picked up one of the flags. It bore the name of a contractor she'd never heard of. A door down the street opened, and out popped an older woman with short, curled hair and a bright pink jogging suit. Emily had seen her around before, always walking briskly from house to house, clipboard in hand. The neighbors often called her Michelle Patterson, though there was gossip that behind closed doors people sarcastically referred to her as Karen. Emily didn't know why, but the name was often accompanied by eye rolls and muttered complaints. This had to be that person. "Good morning," Emily called, approaching her. "Do you know anything about these flags in my yard?" Michelle, Karen, squinted, tapping her pen against the clipboard. "It's the new fiber optic line. Didn't you get the memo from the HOA? We're modernizing Maplewood Heights." Emily frowned. "I heard talk about it, but I never consented to having it installed across my lawn. Doesn't the contractor need my permission, or at least an easement on file?" With a curt sniff, Michelle waved a hand dismissively. "My dear, the HOA has full authority to manage public utilities for the community's benefit. If we waited for each resident's permission, we'd never get anything done. This project is necessary for better internet connectivity. It'll raise property values and improve our standing as a forward-thinking neighborhood." Despite the woman's breezy confidence, Emily remained uneasy. Yes, fiber internet was nice, but it seemed quite a leap to trench through someone's property without even a courtesy heads-up. "I'd really like some documentation about this," she persisted. "Could you provide me with the relevant permits or HOA guidelines that allow you to do this?" Michelle let out a short laugh as though the question itself was laughable. "Of course, I'll see what I can find. In the meantime, the work crew will arrive tomorrow. Don't worry, they'll restore your lawn afterward." She turned on her heel, jogging off to the next house, presumably to check on something else. Emily stood there, feeling her frustration climb. The conversation set the tone for the days to come. She had no idea how deeply she was about to be pulled into the quagmire of HOA politics, nor how far Michelle was willing to go to enforce her version of community standards. Early the next day, a construction crew appeared. Emily, coffee mug in hand, watched them roll up in a large utility truck. Several workers hopped out, wearing safety vests and hard hats, carrying spools of bright orange fiber conduit. One man set about marking lines in the grass with spray paint, while another started up a small trenching machine. Emily quickly walked outside, raising her voice above the rumble of the engine. "Excuse me," she shouted. "Hold on, stop for a second." The lead worker switched off the machine, and the rumbling died. He looked up, surprised. "Yes, ma'am." She gestured to the yard. "Do you have a permit or official notice to dig on my property?" "I've never been shown one." The worker shrugged, pulling a folded paper from his pocket. "We have a general work order from the Maplewood Heights HOA. They said they have the easements cleared. May I see it?" Emily asked. The man handed over the paper. It was a standard construction assignment, referencing an HOA project. Nowhere did Emily see her signature, her address singled out as an approved location, or a city permit number. This was generic. "You can call the HOA office if you have concerns," the man offered politely. "We're just following orders." Reluctantly, Emily let them continue. She had no desire to cause a scene with the crew. They were only doing their jobs. Once they resumed, the small machine roared to life, cutting a narrow channel in her lawn, the blades churning up soil in a neat, continuous line. In its wake, the worker laid bright orange conduit, which a second person backfilled almost immediately. Feeling helpless, Emily retreated to her home office and phoned the city's public works department. After a tedious series of transfers, she spoke with a clerk who looked up Maplewood Heights on a database. "I see an approval for community fiber optic expansion in the vicinity," the clerk explained, "but it references existing underground utility easements along the sidewalk. It's not supposed to run through private lawns unless separate permissions were granted." "That's the problem," Emily said, frustration creeping into her voice. "I never granted permission, and now my yard looks like a construction zone." The clerk replied. "Let me check if an individual permit was filed." "No, I don't see anything referencing your specific address. You might want to contact your HOA directly or, if necessary, file a property damage claim." By the time Emily hung up, the crew was nearly done. A swirl of dust and freshly disturbed earth marred the once pristine grass. Anger simmered in her chest, but she resolved to stay calm and gather information. She decided her next step was to confront the HOA more formally, attend their board meeting, and demand to see the official documentation. If none existed, she'd insist they remove the line. Despite her preference for quiet solitude, Emily realized she had no choice but to wade into the murky waters of neighborhood politics, waters that Michelle Patterson ruled with a tight grip. The following Tuesday evening, Emily showed up at the Maplewood Heights Community Center, a squat, brick building near the neighborhood's main entrance. A sign out front announced, "HOA meeting, 7 p.m. Inside, she found a modest hall with rows of folding chairs facing a long table at which 5 board members sat. She recognized Michelle Patterson at the center. The woman wore a blazer and an air of smug authority. Several other residents milled about, some sipping coffee from styrofoam cups. A hush fell over the crowd when Michelle tapped the microphone. She welcomed everyone in a formal tone, bragging about the new fiber optic project and how it would catapult Maplewood Heights into the technological future. Polite applause followed, mostly from the board members themselves. Emily raised her hand once the floor opened for questions. Michelle eyed her with mild displeasure, but nodded. "Yes, Ms. Wilkins? You have a comment." Emily stepped up to the microphone. "Yes, thank you. I'd like to know why the HOA authorized construction across my private property without my explicit permission. I've spoken to the city, and they indicated no individual easement or permit includes my yard." A murmur rustled the crowd. A faintly perturbed look crossed Michelle's face. The board's secretary, a timid woman named Janice, shuffled some papers but said nothing. Michelle cleared her throat. "Ms. Wilkins, Maplewood Heights has a general utility easement along the front portion of each property. It's standard in most developments. I assure you, everything is legal and above board." Emily pressed on. "Actually, the city clerk told me the documented easement is limited to the public sidewalk area, not halfway into my yard. I want to see the specific records you're referencing." A flicker of annoyance flashed in Michelle's eyes. Still, she plastered on a smile. "Of course. Our association's attorney can show you the paperwork. I'm sure it's just a misunderstanding. We'll be happy to clarify." Satisfied for the moment, Emily returned to her seat. The meeting wrapped up with the usual HOA topics: lawn height, fence paint, an upcoming community barbecue. Yet, even in those mundane discussions, Emily sensed the underlying dynamic. Michelle Patterson, or Karen, held the final say on each matter, and the other board members mostly nodded in agreement. Afterward, Emily approached the table to follow up, but Michelle slipped away, claiming she had urgent business. Janice, the secretary, told Emily the HOA's attorney wasn't available that night, but would reach out soon. When Emily pressed for a contact number, Janice fumbled with her notes before handing over a generic business card for a legal firm located downtown. Emily tried to call the next day. No one there had any idea about a specialized HOA easement for fiber optics in Maplewood Heights. Frustration turned to anger. The sense of being brushed off was unmistakable. She told herself that if the HOA thought they could bury an unapproved line across her property without repercussion, they had another thing coming. Emily resolved to keep pressing, unaware that Michelle Patterson would soon escalate matters far beyond a simple property dispute. Days passed with no word from the HOA or any attorney. Emily began receiving oddly specific violation notices in her mailbox. One claimed her mailbox post was insufficiently painted. Another said her front hedges extended an inch beyond the allowable boundary. They were petty, trifling complaints, yet they arrived almost daily. At first, she ignored them, but the onslaught continued. In total, she received 5 warnings in a single week. Each threatened fines if she did not comply within the mandated time frame. Furious, Emily suspected these notices were Michelle's doing, a transparent attempt to intimidate her into dropping the fiber optic issue. Adding fuel to the fire, a neighbor confided in Emily one afternoon. "I hear Michelle, Karen, has been telling people you're trying to block the entire internet upgrade for the community," the neighbor said, eyes darting nervously. "She's saying you're holding the neighborhood hostage with your demands." Emily's jaw dropped. "That's completely untrue. I just want them to respect my property rights." The neighbor shrugged helplessly. "Well, that's what she's telling people. She even hinted you might sue the HOA and cost everyone extra dues. Folks are worried." The rumor mill kicked into overdrive. Emily noticed fewer friendly waves when she drove through the subdivision. At the grocery store, another neighbor whispered that the HOA was considering further action to ensure the fiber line's continuity, implying they might forcibly solidify an easement via legal means. Unwilling to be bullied, Emily contacted a local attorney of her own. His name was Travis Brown, a straightforward man with glasses perched low on his nose. He explained that in many communities, HOAs do have limited easements for utilities, but that they're usually well documented. If the HOA can't show a written easement allowing them to run new lines across your yard, he said, you likely have grounds to demand removal or compensation for trespassing. Emily left that meeting armed with fresh determination. She decided to attend the next HOA gathering with her lawyer in tow, if necessary. Michelle Patterson might have spread rumors, but a legal confrontation would force clarity. Still, she didn't realize how personal the conflict would become. Michelle had invested her pride into the fiber optic project, touting it as her legacy improvement. Anyone who threatened that plan, especially a newer resident like Emily, would become a target. The petty fines were just the start. While the tension brewed, Emily found an unlikely ally, an older gentleman named Mark Hadley who lived 3 streets over. After hearing about her plight, he reached out with a phone call. "I own some rental properties in the area," he explained, "and I've had run-ins with Michelle before. She uses the HOA to push her personal agenda, often disregarding protocol. I might be able to help." Over coffee one Saturday, Mark shared documents he'd gathered during previous disputes with the HOA. They revealed a pattern of questionable tactics, vague easements, aggressive fee collection, and intimidation. Michelle had once tried to fine Mark for renting out his property to the wrong type of tenant, using coded language that hinted at discrimination. When Mark threatened to sue, the HOA quietly backed off, but not before leaving him with a sense of how manipulative Michelle could be. "I'm certain she's forging or misrepresenting some documents for this fiber deal," Mark said. "She wants Maplewood Heights to become a model tech-savvy community. It's rumored she's even negotiating a personal finder's fee with the cable company." Emily's eyes widened. "So she might be profiting from the deal personally?" Mark nodded. "That's the rumor. I can't prove it, but there are ways to find out. If you want to dig deeper, I can get you the contact for the fiber provider's local rep." Emily thanked him, grateful not to feel so isolated. She spent the rest of that weekend scouring the HOA's bylaws, city records, and any other relevant documents Mark provided. The more she uncovered, the shakier the HOA's position appeared. There was no direct mention of new fiber lines crossing private yards. The only utility easement spelled out was for the original sewage and water lines, completely different from the large-scale fiber project now underway. Encouraged, she prepared a letter to the HOA board, a formal demand that they produce the legal basis for burying fiber optic lines on her property. She gave them 10 days to comply or face an injunction. She figured it would prompt a serious reply at last. Sure enough, Her phone rang one evening. A call from Michelle Patterson herself. "Well, Ms. Wilkins," Michelle drawled, "I received your letter. Quite firm, I must say. However, you should know that your stance is quite divisive. The entire neighborhood wants faster internet, and you're standing in the way." "I'm not against faster internet," Emily retorted. "I'm against trespassing." Michelle's voice hardened. "I strongly advise you to reconsider legal threats against the HOA. It won't end well for you." Emily hung up, her heart pounding. That phone call crystallized the conflict. Michelle was not going to cooperate. She'd chosen to escalate, leaving Emily to wonder just how far the HOA president would go to safeguard her personal ambitions. As the standoff dragged on, Emily saw no movement from the HOA. Days passed without any official response to her demand. Meanwhile, the once patchy rumors about Emily blocking the neighborhood's internet were now swirling like a dust devil. At the grocery store, a fellow resident glared at her, muttering something about selfishness. A mother and son walked by her driveway, gave a pointed look, and hurried on. Clearly, Michelle's campaign to turn the community against Emily was working. Her frustration reached a boiling point one afternoon when she discovered a new sprinkler line had been accidentally cut by the fiber installation crew. Water seeped into the freshly turned soil in her yard. This was the last straw. In a burst of resolve, Emily grabbed a shovel from her garage. She walked out to the bright orange conduit, still partly exposed near the corner of her yard. With careful, methodical motions, she began uncovering the line. The conduit was buried only a couple of feet down, easy enough to reach. Sweat trickled down her neck as she pried loose the dirt. Finally, the plastic tubing lay bare for several yards. She followed it until she reached the point closest to the public sidewalk. There, she saw that the line was spliced into a larger trunk cable that snaked through underground junctions. Emily paused, adrenaline pumping, as she considered the possible consequences. Then she took a pair of heavy-duty wire cutters and clamped them around the conduit. "This is on my property," she muttered to herself. "They never had my consent. They can't force it on me." She squeezed, feeling the tools slice through the plastic casing. Instantly, the tension in the cable slackened. Inside, she found 3 separate fiber cables. She carefully snipped each one. Her pulse thundered in her ears. Part of her felt guilty, knowing she might be cutting off her neighbor's newly installed service. But she reminded herself it was her legal right to remove unauthorized materials from her property, especially after repeated warnings and no official paperwork. With the line severed, Emily meticulously dug out a 5-foot section of conduit. She coiled the fiber cables and carried them to her garage. Then, in a bold flourish, she penned a short note. "Dear HOA, this fiber conduit was installed on my property without permission and without a valid easement. I have removed it. If you dispute my right to do so, please provide official documentation within 3 days. Otherwise, consider this matter closed. Regards, Emily Wilkins." She secured the note around the coiled cable segment with a rubber band, placed it in a large padded envelope, and addressed it to the HOA's official P.O. box. The next morning, she handed it to the mail carrier. Word of her actions spread quickly. Some neighbors quietly applauded, Mark Hadley among them, saying she had every right. Others were outraged, claiming she undermined the entire neighborhood's progress. Michelle Patterson was furious. The HOA board convened an emergency session to address the disruptive actions of Ms. Wilkins. Emily didn't attend, but Mark fed her updates, having slipped in as an observer. Michelle ranted about how Emily had deliberately sabotaged a community project, labeling her conduct selfish, disruptive, and illegal. The board voted to impose a series of fines on Emily, citing an obscure clause in the bylaws about willful destruction of communal property. The total exceeded $1,000. They also threatened to place a lien on her home if she didn't pay. When Emily got the official notice in the mail, she nearly exploded with anger. The letter alleged that by removing the fiber line, she had harmed the communal infrastructure. Yet the notice still contained no legal easement or permission slip to justify the fiber's presence on her lawn. She forwarded the notice to her attorney, Travis. He responded with a strongly worded legal letter, demanding the fines be rescinded immediately and warning the HOA they were overstepping their authority. Travis also pointed out that the fiber line was owned not by the HOA itself, but by a third-party internet provider. meaning the HOA's claim of communal property was shaky at best. For several tense days, Emily braced herself for an even harsher backlash. She wasn't surprised to see rumors intensify. Some neighbors began whispering that Emily was a troublemaker who might cause HOA dues to skyrocket if the fiber provider sought damages. The negativity weighed on her, but she refused to cave. "All I want is for them to acknowledge they have no right to run lines here without my permission," she repeated to Mark. But Michelle had gone too far to back down gracefully. She needed a scapegoat for the expensive fiasco, so she turned her attention to forging evidence that would justify the HOA's stance. Mark discovered through one of his acquaintances that Michelle had instructed the board's secretary to pull old property records, presumably to find something, anything, to paint Emily as being in the wrong. Despite the gloom, Emily found an ever-growing circle of supporters. A handful of neighbors approached her privately, expressing sympathy and admitting they feared speaking out due to Michelle's history of retaliation. One couple told Emily that they, too, had a suspicious line buried on their lot, apparently without correct permits. Meanwhile, Mark's sleuthing paid off. He discovered that the fiber provider's local rep had initially requested the HOA obtain explicit consent from each homeowner before trenching. In an email Mark managed to access, through the open records process or by a sympathetic source within the provider's office, the rep wrote, "We cannot proceed with final installation without documented easements or homeowner signatures indicating they agree to this fiber route." Michelle's reply to that email was telling. "We have a general right-of-way in Maplewood Heights. Proceed as planned. I assure you we have the necessary authorizations." No attachments or specific signatures were provided. It was effectively a trust me from Michelle. With this new evidence, Emily's attorney drafted a formal complaint, citing misrepresentation and potential fraud. The day after filing, Emily's phone rang. A city official wanted to meet with her about the ongoing dispute. The official explained that the city had received calls from the internet provider, who was concerned about possible legal ramifications. The provider insisted it had been misled by the HOA into thinking everything was approved. Emily recounted the entire ordeal to the official, from the flags in her yard to the severed conduit. The official promised a thorough investigation. When she hung up, Emily felt a cautious optimism stirring. Perhaps, at last, Michelle Patterson would be forced to face her reckless behavior. But Emily still couldn't predict the explosive fallout that would occur once all the details came to light. As tension reached a fever pitch, a joint hearing was scheduled by the city's Code Enforcement Committee to address the fiber installation fiasco in Maplewood Heights. HOA representatives, the internet provider's legal counsel, and affected residents were invited. Emily, with Travis by her side, arrived early at the municipal building, a stark contrast to the modest HOA meetings in the community center. Michelle Patterson swept in with a haughty expression, flanked by the HOA's board members. She wore a crisp navy blue suit, her chin held high. Emily noticed the forced smiles on the faces of some other board members. They seemed unsure, as though they knew trouble was brewing but felt compelled to stand behind their president. The hearing commenced with city officials presenting a timeline of the fiber installation, complete with public records. Then came the showstopper. The internet provider's lead attorney stood up and displayed the email chain Mark had uncovered, which showed Michelle's repeated assurances that the HOA had all permissions in place. When asked to produce the actual signed easements, Michelle offered a folder of documents that turned out to be incomplete and, in several places, suspiciously altered. The city's legal representative examined these documents closely. A hush fell over the room. Finally, the representative looked up and said, "Ms. Patterson, it appears these signatures are inconsistent. Also, the notary stamp is missing on several pages. Can you explain this discrepancy?" Michelle stammered, trying to cover with vague references to administrative mix-ups. But the tension in her voice betrayed her. Emily glanced around. Even the other board members were inching away, as if they could sense the impending crisis. A city investigator stepped forward with a statement. "We have grounds to believe some of these records are forgeries," he said calmly. "We'll be forwarding our findings to the district attorney's office for potential criminal charges, if that proves true." An audible gasp rippled through the room. Michelle's face turned ashen. This is ridiculous," she hissed. "I was told the permissions existed. I simply compiled the paperwork. But the damage was done. The board members whispered among themselves, and one of them, looking genuinely shaken, spoke up. "Michelle, you told us everything was legally sound. Now we see these documents might be fake." Chaos ensued. The city officials swiftly concluded the fiber line had been placed without lawful easements. The internet provider's attorney demanded compensation for the costly misunderstanding. They threatened to sue the HOA and Michelle personally for the wasted materials, canceled contracts, and lost labor time due to the fiasco. Meanwhile, Emily's own complaint for trespass, property damage, and emotional distress advanced. The swirl of legal claims was staggering. By the following week, the city had recommended that the entire Maplewood Heights fiber expansion project be halted pending further investigation. The internet provider publicly withdrew from the partnership, effectively ending the dream of community-wide high-speed connectivity Michelle had touted. Worse for Michelle, the district attorney's office opened a criminal inquiry into the forged signatures. Investigators discovered more irregularities, including unaccounted for HOA funds, questionable invoice padding, and potential self-dealing in awarding fiber contracts. It seemed Michelle had turned the entire fiber project into a personal cash grab, forging documents to push it through. When the charges came, they were severe: fraud, forgery, and misappropriation of association funds. News vans parked outside Maplewood Heights, capturing the dramatic fall of the once invincible HOA president. The rest of the board scrambled to distance themselves, claiming ignorance. Some resigned outright. Meanwhile, a separate civil court found Michelle personally liable for damages to Emily's property. The court ordered the HOA to refund any fines they'd tried to impose and to pay Emily's legal fees. Finally, after a lengthy and very public trial, Michelle Patterson, Karen, was sentenced to prison. The judge cited her abuse of public trust and brazen deception as aggravating factors. The icing on the cake came when the court ordered her personal property sold off to cover restitution, including a portion of the HOA's financial losses and Emily's damage claims. For the remaining residents of Maplewood Heights, Michelle's downfall was a cautionary tale of unchecked power. The HOA was forced to reorganize, adopting strict oversight policies. The board's makeup changed drastically, with fresh faces who promised more transparency and real checks and balances. Emily, though drained from the ordeal, felt relief and vindication. She no longer received harassing letters about her mailbox or hedge height. Neighbors who once scowled at her now apologized, admitting they'd been swayed by rumors. Though the entire fiber optic project was scrapped, most people realized the fiasco wasn't Emily's fault, but the product of one individual's arrogance and greed. On the day Michelle's property was seized, Emily strolled by out of curiosity. She watched moving trucks haul away the meticulously curated furniture and decor from Michelle's once fancy home. It struck Emily that someone who had invested so much energy into controlling others had finally lost control of everything. No matter how you spin it, forging legal documents, misappropriating funds, and trespassing on private property could not be excused by community benefit. In the end, Maplewood Heights gradually found its footing again. Without Michelle's dominance, the HOA improved. Residents began trusting one another a bit more, having learned how critical it was to question authority when something felt wrong. For Emily, life returned to a peaceful routine, her yard restored, her sprinklers repaired, and her conscience clear. The fiber line was gone, and so was the overreach that had threatened her rights. Whenever she saw the faint trench mark in the grass, she couldn't help but smile just a little at the memory of coiling that unauthorized conduit and sending it to the HOA with a scathing letter. It was a testament to standing one's ground, and the difference one determined person could make against a so-called Karen who believed herself invincible.